Mike's on.
A little after 2 on the day the Yankees named their new manager, Aaron Boone. We are joined by the general manager, Brian Cashman. Cash, welcome. How are you?
I'm good, Mike. How you doing?
Good, thank you. Cash, this was kind of a long, I guess you had no rush, but it was kind of a prolonged in terms of day search. But how many serious candidates did you feel you had for the job? When you got rid of Joe, which we'll get to in a minute, but how many guys would you say were serious candidates?
Well, we had a preliminary long list. I mean, I engaged my entire baseball operations department and said, all right, I need you to utilize all your resources and your personal opinions, and let's put together a pref list or a potential list. I guess not a pref list, but a potential list, and then we'll vet that list after it's assembled. And so on my own, I certainly reached out to people throughout the game, general managers, especially that I respect, that are, I think, in alignment with the same type of philosophies of team building that I have. That who would you recommend? Who are the people that the unexpected? Who are the people I definitely should interview? And Aaron Boone came up quite often in that process for me. And then so I brought that name to the table from suggestions. He wasn't the name I had on any prelim list for me. And when I brought it into the room for consideration, I got a lot of real good feedback from my people that some of them knew him. Tim Naring, for instance, used to be the player development director in Cincinnati and had Boone as a player and knew the family well. And so he was one guy I relied on, and his feedback was extremely positive, as was Jim Hendry of, this is definitely a guy that you should talk to, and you might be very well surprised about how good he would be.
Has the dynamics of the job changed so much that experience 10 or 15 years ago might have been a prerequisite and it's not anymore?
Yeah, obviously, I guess, because, I'm here presenting a candidate to our fan base with no experience. And I think 6 of the current 7 new hires don't have any experience in the game this year.
Yeah, no, it's very different now. A lot of guys, it doesn't seem to be the prerequisite it was, which tells you that the job may have changed. Has the job in your mind, has the job description in your mind over your 20 years, has it changed a lot of the manager?
Well, the job description clearly is still at the end game is to win. It's just how you put yourself in a position to do so, obviously, I think has changed. And so, turning the clock back, I think you'd hire a manager to, the back in the day to just take over and all the work and effort that the front office had done for 12 months, and the manager then gets to drive that car without restriction or input. I think the job's changed where I think we've realized that it doesn't work that way. I kind of describe this as, listen, we spend, from the Yankees standpoint, we spend $200 million plus to build a space shuttle. We're NASA, and we're building the space shuttle, and we have a mission in mind, but you need a specialized person that's capable as an astronaut to fly that space shuttle. But while they're doing that, they're going to stay in touch with you every step of the way. And
that's actually a good way of putting it, which shows you that your influence and the front office influence is now far more pronounced than it used to be.
Yeah, well, I think it always should have been that way, because again, listen, I'll turn in the laser focus a little bit differently. We were successful in 2017 for a lot of reasons. Some of it was certainly Joe Girardi and our coaching staff, but some of it clearly is decision-making that we have in various departments. So we were just as successful because Donnie Rowland, our international scouting director, had invested into Gary Sanchez and, for instance, Luis Severino, and we're just as successful because Damon Oppenheimer selected an Aaron Judge, for instance, in the amateur draft, and our pro scouting department allowed us to decide to pursue and engage and ultimately consummate a trade for instance, Didi Gregorius for shortstop, or Aaron Hicks that emerged in the outfield, or obviously Canely and Sonny Gray and Robertson. And so it's a collaborative effort, and to provide that manager with a lot of talent, and that's over a course of time, and not just year, but years, and that's involving our player development system to obviously put these players in position to close the gap on everything they necessarily need to improve upon so they can reach their ceiling, and then you turn those guys over for 6 months to a manager and major league coaching staff to try to plug and play and allow them to reach their maximum potential when they emerge as major league candidates. So they're one piece of a puzzle. The manager is an important piece, but one piece but they're not the piece. I think back in the day, it used to be the only piece. They'd have final say and final decision and stuff like that. But it hasn't worked that way for quite some time, and we're not. And I can tell you this, because I see every now and then people talk about where I'm looking to have lineup control and stuff like that. I never, and you can check with a Joe Girardi and you can check with a Joe Torre, and I'm proud that I worked 10 years with both of those guys. And but I never once dictated a lineup. I never once dictated who to play. The only thing I've ever asked for any of the people I work with, and I think I'm the easiest GM to work with in the game, is hey, let's hear this out, let's talk this out, let's discuss it. And at the end of the day, I hired all these people for a reason, because I think they're extremely bright and smart and capable in what they're doing, and you'll make the final call on what to do, and we're not going to agree all the time, but I'm going to support you every way I possibly can to allow you to have success, but recognize that there's going to be failure along the way too, and I'm proud of the fact that we don't do this adjustment or this press conference very often. There's a lot of stability because we know that we're invested in each other, and we're working well with each other, and that's Aaron Boone is now a new extension of that, and trying to move forward in the present and the future, and hopefully I'll provide him with enough talent to have success for this franchise.
We're talking with Brian Cashman. There's a fine line here which I want to try and get for the fan if I can, because I know that they don't understand this part because it's new, and they're just hearing it, and they've heard a lot more of it. At what point during the game the manager's in charge? That's fair to say. But would you say that your input is daily as far as who's in the lineup and what the rotation is and whether or not a certain guy is being utilized or not? Does it go that far, or does it stop before that?
No, I was involved every step of the way with Joe Girardi, and I was involved with Joe
including
Torre.
Making the lineup.
We would talk about lineup discussions, and if the relationship's strong, they'll ask, "Hey, what do you think?" They'll separately ask, in real time, because the personnel have changed over time. But they'll ask Tim Naring, "Hey, this is what my thoughts are. What do you think?" And they'll ask Mike Fishman, who's obviously our assistant GM and expert and analyst, "Hey, I was thinking of this. What are your thoughts?"
Would it be a deal breaker if the manager, if in the interview the guy said, "I want to make the lineup. I'm the manager"?
No, he does make the lineup.
No, I mean without input.
Yeah, I would think, not I would think, what's vitally important without question is someone that, so to try to, I guess, paint the right picture here. So if this is June and we have an injury down below, injury at the Major League side, and we need to promote somebody from within from down below.
Right.
Our Major League manager is not seeing who's playing well.
I totally agree with that part.
So he's got to rely on the manager down below and the pitching coach or the hitting coach about, hey, I need an outfielder.
No
who
question.
Do you suggest?
That's easy, though. But how about a slumping guy, whether he stays in the lineup or not?
Yeah, we talked through it, but ultimately the manager is going to have the final say.
Okay. How about making rotation?
Same. We'll talk through it, but he's going to have final say.
Okay.
So every step of the way, I've never once dictated, as I said earlier, the lineup or who to play. We'll talk through it. I'll give you an example. Like in the postseason, we had, and this has happened before, when we were setting our roster or whatever, there's guys I did not want on the roster that, for instance, in this last round that we went through that Joe wanted on the roster, but we talked through it, and he ultimately, this is what you want, this is why you want them, okay, I'd go a different way, but you're the one that's going to plug and play and make these decisions in game. Same prior with Joe Torre. That's how it works. Same in season. The manager just has to make sure that the spigot of information is flowing from player development, pro scouting, analytics, performance science, medical, and be smart enough to realize that, hey, I'm going to digest all this information, and I'm looking to hire constantly, which I did before with Joe Girardi, and I believe I've done now with Aaron Boone. I'm looking for someone that can digest that information, allow that flow to continue, and then they'll gravitate to the best decisions because they're extremely bright. And I think Aaron Boone has a great deal to offer in terms of...
And you want your manager to use his gut. You don't want him to be just locked into the information which says this guy third time around is not going to be successful against the lineup. Get him out of there when you turn the lineup over the third time. But he's pitching well that day. You want him to also believe in his gut, right?
I wouldn't say gut. It's just seeing how it's transpiring.
Right.
Engaged if it's a pitcher.
Like what he sees, but also what he feels that day about a certain player. What he feels like, what he's feeling or what he's seeing that day.
And yes to that question, and also with examples. So you might have a player that isn't maybe the toughest. So he might be throwing well, but you don't believe that, hey, I'm going to get this guy out of here. If he might be cruising, but he might be the type with the demeanor that when adversity hits,
right,
he's not capable of withstanding the adversity. So I'm going to get him out when that will happen. I wouldn't say that's a gut. That's an informed decision on your player. That's not analytically directed. That's more of I know the personality of this guy, and when things start to get tough, he changes as a competitor. And so having a manager know your personnel, that I would say that's not gut. That's making an informed decision that,
I got you. That's fair.
So I don't know if I'm describing it as well, but bottom line is I just want them to have access to everything and then, again, gravitate to the best ideas, whatever they happen to be, and you're using your own judgment. So
did you and Torre clash on this stuff? Was there a clash at times?
I'd say that, as the statistics started to emerge, I think there was, in Joe Torre's case, and I think he talked about it, I think there was less interest in absorbing that information, back then, but the game was different back then.
No question.
So as the game was speeding up, and changing, not speeding up, but as the game was changing, my job is to make sure that the Yankees are using every tool in the toolbox and that we are applying every opportunity to make us the best we can possibly be. So as you turn the clock back then, Boston, as they were catching up to us, for instance, what are they doing that we're not doing? And one of the things that the Red Sox back then were utilizing that we weren't was an extensive analytic department and in their advanced scouting and their pro scouting, all that stuff, and their decision making from the dugout. So we were just trying to now, speed up that process and change, as we move forward to improve our decision making abilities. And so I think if we ever had any discussions that were, uncomfortable at times, it was that. But
okay. Did you ever clash with Girardi on the same subject? Did you and Girardi clash?
We had disagreements at times, but I wouldn't say Joe was closed-minded on any of that stuff at all. So did we have disagreements on things at times? Yes, but I'd say I'm proud that my relationship for the 10 years with Joe Torre as GM, obviously it was longer because I was here as the assistant GM when he was the manager, was, I thought, excellent, and I would say second to none until obviously in the end. And then, and then obviously with Joe Girardi, we went 10 years for a reason. I picked Joe, and I was invested in Joe, and he was invested in us, despite having disagreements at times, which weren't many. We had a great working relationship and a great friendship. So, I would say I think this is a great place to work. I think we have a tremendous ownership commitment. I think this is an operation that empowers its people. So Aaron Boone's going to be empowered to do his job, and just like Joe Girardi was empowered to do his job. The only thing is just provide access to information, and then you make ultimately the final call on lineups and obviously in-game decisions. This isn't like the NFL where the head coach and the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator are on headsets and they're connected to people up that and in certain locations in the press boxes, and they're sending down in the first half and second half pictures and communications via audio or talking to the quarterback in game. That doesn't exist in baseball. And so ultimately we're hiring someone that will be left to their own device to make decisions, and we're hiring people that we trust that will make good, sound, consistent decisions. And it's never going to go perfect. It doesn't work that way, but obviously we're investing in the ceiling of Aaron Boone.
All right, now a couple things. Staff, how much input will you have? How much input will he have into staff, especially, now you gave him the pitching coach, which I think was a great move and imperative. I think he was probably as important as the manager. He was great last year, and he's a very good pitching coach, so we know that. How about bench coach specifically and other coaches? How much input does he have? How much input does the team want?
Same as it's always been. It's a collaborative effort. So as I've worked with the previous managers, they have suggestions that we'll look and vet. The intent is to get him who he would be comfortable with. We've made suggestions to him to look and vet on some internal candidates that we've had or have, and so it'll take probably about 2 weeks at most maybe to work through that and get the staff assembled, but it's going to be something that we're all comfortable with, and as I said, I try to hire people smarter than me, and with that being said, when you hire enough smart people, they will usually gravitate to the best decision, whatever that is. So I think ultimately, just like as a consensus took place, this was ultimately my recommendation, but that came with a lot of people's input. I think that whoever winds up on this coaching staff is going to be more likely than not a unanimous decision that everyone feels really good about. And that's our guy, and that plug and play here, whether it's a bench coach, third base coach, hitting coach, the remaining part of the staff, first base coach, the responsibilities include base running and outfield defense, infield defense, amongst other things. So it's going to be one of those circumstances where we're all going to be in it together and agreeing, and seeing it the same way. So it's not going to be any issue that I'm worried about.
All right, but would you look for the bench coach to have managerial experience because the Boone doesn't? Is that something that would be important to you or not important?
Not necessarily, because we have a guy right there next to Booney in the dugout, and Larry Rothschild, that's been a former manager that also as a pitching coach has worked under some of the best in Lou Piniella and in Jim Leland in Miami, Piniella in Chicago, Dusty Baker obviously in Chicago, amongst others. So Larry Rothschild is serves a great deal of importance in many ways, not just the pitching side, but
okay.
But if
so you're going to lean on him for a lot of stuff then, okay?
Well, it depends how it plays out. So if
right.
Booney, for instance, suggests somebody that's not necessarily a former manager, but he believes would serve him and us very well because he brings and checks a number of other boxes that are important, and we see it the same way, then he's going to get the guy he wants. That actually, I will clarify something, and I am very pliable on something like this. Aaron Boone should have who he wants sitting next to him. My comfort level with that will be a lot less
I agree with that.
Than any other category. So
gotcha.
He's going to wind up having more weight in who sits next to him. I will have less weight on that.
Someone he's comfortable and trusts.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So if it turns out that it's someone that doesn't have managerial experience, but I look at the guy through an interview and vetting process that, I can, this guy can roll with us. This is not an issue. There's no glaring obvious problem. Booney's going to get what he wants because he deserves that, and that relationship is more important in that bench side than anybody. So, and with Larry being there, it allows that to be that way.
What did you see in Boone? What were the characteristics? We're talking with Brian Cashman. What were the characteristics, since he has been just a player and a broadcaster, not just, but that's what his roles have been. He hasn't been in the dugout. He hasn't been with teams. What is it that he brought to either your meetings or to the overall interview process that got him the job?
Well, the baseball experience is extensive. He comes from that family heritage.
Okay.
So he's been exposed to the game,
right.
from such a young age. So he's got that experience growing up in clubhouses, under his dad's watchful eye.
Right.
And then obviously playing it out as a player from college at USC to professional. And then obviously he's gotten a different aspect, which probably serves him well from being in the broadcast booth for 8 years at ESPN and getting exposure when he does those Sunday night game of the weeks or the radio shows in the postseason where he, in the media private sessions, what the fans may not be aware of, when you're doing those primetime, jobs, you get access to the manager and the home side and the visiting side every game to pick their brains, whether it's in April, June, July, playoff setting. You get a chance to pick their brains about the controversy of the day, the tough decision you just came off of. How is it going? How was it about the process that you just pulled that guy and you hurt his feelings, or you sent that guy out, or you released somebody? He's getting both on the record and dialogue, but off the record background from them about their trials and tribulations. And I think that was, a little bit of on-job training that probably has helped a great deal. But his ability to obviously understand the game that he already knows and loves, his communication skills seem to be off the charts. His relatability, his genuineness, his body clock in terms of, how I think he'll handle stressors and pressure and stuff, I think, resonated strongly throughout that process of our interview with him. And I was very surprised, again, when you farm him out to the analytics staff, how he was left to his own devices, in alignment with a lot of the stuff they see, because he'll be left to his own devices. When you farmed him out into, the performance science group or the medical group, how progressive and open-minded and he already is, which is unusual. So he was checking all the boxes, when we got farmed out to our mental skills coach, when he got farmed out to the media relations director, and then, it was all the feedback came back of, wow, this guy is a lot more impressive than we would have expected, and therefore another box got checked. And next thing you know, he started emerging as not just a legitimate candidate, but the candidate that we needed to focus on.
Cash, one thing I noticed in a couple of different press conferences with different managers this year, this was stressed. player relationships, the players will understand how much we care about them, how much we are pulling for them, how much we love them. Do you feel now that in this day and age, there is more to the player relationship with the manager than in past days where the manager used to basically say, you know what, my way or the highway? I mean, do you think now that has changed and is more important?
Yes, no question about it.
Why so?
Mike, when you and I grew up, we saw a different culture where, a head, whether it was head basketball coach, like Bobby Knight, for instance,
right.
They had their different styles. It's my way or the highway, and it worked, and it was allowed to work at that time and effort. But you see now today's generation is different. And I remember something that Joe Torre spoke to a lot when he was here managing, and when we would make tough decisions, whether it's sending a player out, sending him down, not making the club, benching him, what have you, and I, as general manager, being part of that process. But Joe Torre always talked about how it was important. It's not important that you don't agree with the decision, but it's important that a manager takes the time to explain why we're making the decisions that we're making. And, and that's a genuine effort on behalf of the leaders of our sport, at least, and it certainly, I think, relates to every sport now, that I think the head coach, the manager, go out of their way to spend all the extra time and effort necessary to, in a proper way, to communicate with your athlete about what's necessary, what they need to do, where they're deficient, where they're going, and if we decide to take from them, this is the reason why. You give them the respect of, you can disagree with this, but what you need to do is take the time and effort to make sure they understand why you're making the decision you're doing. So whether you're benching a guy in postseason and playing somebody else because you think that the matchup is better, so be it. But you need to go ahead and communicate in such a way versus not care in any way, shape, or form that they have a wife and family flying in from a location to watch them expected to play that day and they're not playing. You need to understand all those things that go behind the scenes, for instance, that so you can give them the respect that they've earned and deserved. I think that world is different today because of that than it was back when we were.
So you expect your manager to do that? You just think that's part of managing now?
Well, I think that was part of managing when Joe Girardi was doing the last 10 years, and I used that example that Joe Torre was doing when he was doing it 10 years ago, but I think that 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, no one spent any time on that because they had the final power, and I watched the other night. On, I think it was ESPN, the making of Mr. October and watching the Billy Martin pulling Reggie from the outfield because of loafing, and we all know how that relationship wasn't good. It was a different time. It was a different time, that, you either liked somebody you didn't, and you didn't take the time to close the gap on it. It was just going to be the way it was. Your personalities clashed or not. I think the true successful leaders in today's environment are the ones that spend the time and effort to invest in everybody on your roster to get the most out of them. You're not going to have everybody won over, and you're not going to have everybody like you. But I think part of the effort is to make sure that you clearly are capable and have the content, but you also have to have the time and effort to relate with them and understand where they're coming from and what makes them tick. When I spent time in San Antonio with Popovich, for instance, one of the things Pop talked about was, how he, one of his players had a bad practice, and he blew that player up that day because he was like, what's going on here? And he ripped him in front of the entire club. But one of the things he shared with me which was impactful for him, was he was unaware that particular player, whoever it was, lost his dog that day. He was euthanized and put down. And he was so mad at his staff, whether it was coaches or front office or the scouts who knew this but didn't relate it to him, because he wouldn't have taken that approach in that practice session that day. And that's where all these things about knowing your people are vitally important, and what's going on in their lives that are not baseball related that could be affecting how they're going about their business. That's the intuition and knowledge that are necessary for, I think, today's leaders to do. And I think Pop's a perfect example of
Is
why
that
he's
something
so
that Joe Girardi had problems with?
No, I think Joe did everything I think Joe cared about his players a great deal. And again, the only difference of a Joe Girardi and Aaron Boone is Joe's done it here for 10 years now. And and I'm not saying that there definitely is an expiration period, but I do think that it's harder to maintain the ability, in that dugout and the stressors on a day in and day out basis, on a year in year out basis. And I think Joe walked that line, extremely well. I think he did a great job for this franchise, but I'm charged now that when his contract was expired to make what's the best decision to serve us well in the present and the future as we move forward. But no, Joe Girardi did a great job, and I was very proud of the decision I made to hire him and work with him as long as he did, and he served us extremely well, and we'll be thankful that he was an impactful member as a player of this franchise as well as a manager and a coach prior to managing in this franchise. But at the same time, I got to make tough decisions, and now that decision was staring me in the face of, do I feel we need to move forward in a different direction? And obviously I made that decision for better or worse. That's the investment I made, and I'm willing to live with that decision, and I'm comfortable with that decision despite it being a very difficult one. But I love Joe Girardi. I thought he was a great manager, and I think obviously he'll provide an opportunity for somebody in the future if he so chooses, which I think he has that desire. He'll manage somebody and do a great job as they move forward. I just felt like, based on a lot of reasons, as we move forward, it was in our best interest to have somebody else in that dugout starting in 2018.
Brian Cashman with us now. We'll have Aaron Boone when we're finished with the general manager. With him not having the kind of experience that some might, and with him having been an everyday player, not a pitcher, do you concern yourself with him as far as his ability to handle the bullpen, or you expect Rothschild to be your force there? Or is that something that was in any way, did it give you pause? Did you have any worry about that big aspect of handling the club?
Well, in some of the candidates that went through the process, that was clearly something that was a concern in terms of dissecting what they were bringing to the table, that they were deficient on the pitching side. I felt that Aaron Boone, answered those questions extremely well and comfortably. And so I have great comfort, first and foremost, left his own devices, that he will do a great job there. But regardless, I have, again, using an NFL analogy, I've got, I think, the best defensive coordinator in baseball in Larry Rothschild, right there as his resource and guiding light. He knows these guys in and out, both bullpen and rotation, what makes them tick and how to use them and maximize their potential. And as Larry served Joe Girardi extremely well there, he's going to serve, obviously, as our defensive coordinator, Aaron Boone, extremely well there, too. So that gives me, real good comfort, and I know Aaron's excited to have Larry as well. As any manager, whether it's an inexperienced or experienced manager, they would love to be able to call Larry Rothschild their pitching coach.
Before you go, anything you can shed light on about Ohtani and this process now? Anything you can tell me?
No, I mean, listen, the Yankees have had a great home field advantage, for history. Being in this market, in this city with this fan base, has served us well 99.9% of the time. It sells itself. Unfortunately, in this circumstance, it didn't. It was something that location and market size disqualified us. And listen, I'm okay with that. I mean, our job is to pursue all the great
once
talent.
In a while. It happened with Greg Maddux. It's happened now with Ohtani.
Yeah, so it's our job is to put ourselves in the best position possible. I feel comfortable we did that without the knowledge that it was all false hustle.
Right.
I guess in the end of the day, but I did tell our staff when we were going through this process that, listen, if he doesn't pick us, it's not because of us. In theory, because of in terms of effort and scouting and stuff. It's
so you did everything you could do. You did everything you could do.
And but I was unaware that anything east of the Mississippi was getting disqualified. So that made me even more comfortable, because when I started, seeing on Twitter, Toronto's out, Boston's out, Miami's out, Atlanta's out, all Cincinnati's out, Detroit's out, as I was marking all the cities down, it just turned out to be West Coast and Arizona spring training only. I'm like, wow, I wish we didn't even have to go through the process. But thankfully, they didn't give us a courtesy of a round two that just because they didn't want to disrespect us. I'm glad that they didn't drag us out to California and waste our time. I wanted access to the player. It's not to be. I respect his decision. I think he's going to be an impactful major leaguer.
What do you think he's going to do?
Well, I hope he picks a National League.
No, I mean, what do you think he's going to play? I mean, what do you think the final? What is his position going to be? What is he going to do? Is he just going to pitch?
in our case, obviously we would have had him in the starting rotation as long as he earned that right, and then potentially in DH spot at times when he clearly had time to recover.
That would have been worth seeing. I mean, I want to see. You think somebody can actually do that?
He can play the outfield as well. So depending on the locale he picks, we'll see. I'd rather the Mets have to deal with him than
Gotcha.
most of the time in the National League than the Yankees in the American League now. But we'll see how it shakes out. But
is he as good as advertised? Does everything tell you he's as good as advertised?
Yeah, I mean, he's an exciting young talent that has a chance to be a difference maker. The only thing people talk about not playing both ways and stuff. We do have that taking place clearly in the National League every day. When a starter is pitching, he's hitting at the same time. He's not playing the field when he's not pitching, but we have seen, we've had the capability of doing that. I mean, in this city locale already, Dwight Gooden could have done that. Dwight Gooden could have played outfield and on the days he wasn't
Bumgarner
playing.
could do it for sure.
Bumgarner. I mean, there's so many guys that have such great abilities, but because you're trying to protect them, you don't do it. But if left to their players' own devices as competitors, these guys, if they could force it, they probably would, and some of them would be highly successful, I'm sure, doing it. Maybe the careers wouldn't be as long, but we do have players over currently in this environment that are capable of doing it. It's just something that's out of the box, and it seems, although I never got access to talk to Ohtani or his representatives directly because they didn't give us guidance, it seems like that's a mandatory part of the process that he wants to do both, and if that's the case, it's going to be exciting to watch it play out and see how it works. But unfortunately, it's not going to happen here in New York for us.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks.
All right, Brian Cashman, back after this.